Hello and welcome to Under the Radar, the series where I take a look at underrated and overlooked movies and explain why you should give them a second chance. Today we're going to try something a little bit different because normally in this series I try to talk about movies that have at least passed their 10th anniversary. But for this episode I want to talk about a movie that came out only last year. It's a horror film that got swept under the rug by the studio system, has a fascinating development history, and has the potential to become a massive cult hit. For today's episode of Under the Radar, I am going to be talking about David Pryor's The Empty Man. Released in 2020, The Empty Man stars James Badgedale, is directed by David Pryor, and is loosely based off of the Boom Studios comic book of the same name. The film also had a budget of $4.2 million, which for a first-time director is very rare and almost unheard of nowadays. Now usually this is the point where I'd go over the synopsis of the movie, but because it is so recent and so overlooked, I want you to go into this film as blind as possible because honestly, that's the best way to experience it. I knew very little about this movie before watching it and I was genuinely blown away by what I saw. The Empty Man currently has a 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb, a 2.5 out of 4 stars on RogerEbert.com, and on Rotten Tomatoes its critic score is 70% and the audience score is only 39. So, where do I begin with The Empty Man? I think it makes sense, at least, to start with the director, David Pryor, who before making The Empty Man had a career working on the special features and DVD content for a variety of films released throughout the 2000s. His work includes behind-the-scenes material for Panic Room, The Social Network, Zodiac, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, as well as featurettes for Bad Boys 2, Blade 2, and Master and Commander. Now the reason I bring this up is because, as you can tell from the list I just mentioned, the majority of films he has worked on happen to be those directed by David Fincher, and the many years working with him must have rubbed off, as The Empty Man looks and feels exactly like a Fincher movie. Those of you that have seen any of Fincher's films will know that there is a distinct and precise look to his movies that is unique to him, which is why if you hadn't told me Pryor was behind the film, the smooth camera work, desaturated colour palette and creative transitions would make me think this was one of Fincher's films. So, the movie may look the part, but does it deliver in the other areas? For the most part, the answer is thankfully yes. The score by Christopher Young is very haunting and adds a lot of weight to certain scenes. There is a growing sense of dread and uncertainty that just keeps building the more the movie goes on, and the film also takes a lot of risks in terms of how weird it will go with some ideas, and it does so in a way that doesn't always explain itself, which I think works in the movie's favour. This is also the first movie in quite a while that has a couple of scenes that I legitimately found scary. Personally, I feel like most horror movies nowadays either do a good job of putting me on edge or successfully unsettling me with disturbing imagery. There is a scene in The Empty Man, and I won't go into too much detail for those who haven't seen it, which involves the main character watching some disturbing videos and then witnessing a cult-like ritual from the other side of a river. This whole set piece managed to do all of the above. It put me on edge, it unsettled me, and legitimately scared the crap out of me. There are other scenes throughout the movie that are successfully disturbing and shocking, but that whole sequence alone is reason enough to watch this film in my opinion. Now, to answer the all-important question, why do I think The Empty Man went under the radar? Right, so with this one, there are several key factors at play that contributed to this movie being swept under the rug. The first of those being that it's a 20th Century Fox production. Now usually, the production company is only a small part of the reason a film goes underappreciated, but in this case, it's the other way round. The fact that Pryor was given such a sizable budget and so much creative control on his very first feature film kind of seems a little too good to be true. And that's because it was. Despite making the movie he wanted to make, the studio wanted to cut it down to an hour and a half due to some negative test screenings. However, because the cut down version just led to further negative feedback, the studio basically said, fuck it, and the version that ended up being released was Pryor's original 2-hour 17-minute cut of the film. So at this point you're probably thinking, I don't see what went wrong. This sounds like a win-win scenario for David Pryor. And yeah, to an extent it was. But then Disney bought out Fox, which led to a lot of films Fox had already made, such as this and The New Mutants, being stuck in a metaphorical limbo because, well, Disney didn't know what to do with them. Now, to be honest, if I was Disney in this scenario, I probably also wouldn't know what to do. You have this rather strange horror movie that's almost 2.5 hours long, that's based off of a rather obscure comic. I wouldn't know where to start with marketing a film like that. However, what Disney did decide to do essentially acted as the final nail in the coffin for The Empty Man. After a few small delays courtesy of good old COVID, the film ended up being lazily dumped into cinemas on October the 23rd, 2020, with no build-up or marketing whatsoever. I'm not joking. The first and only trailer they did for the movie was released only a week before the film was actually released into theatres. From that alone, you can tell the studio just didn't care about this movie anymore, and it shows because The Empty Man only earned $1.3 million on its opening weekend, and the numbers kept drastically falling in the weeks that followed. Just a quick reminder to put everything into perspective, this film cost $4.2 million to make. Not to mention the fact that both critics and audiences were incredibly divided on the film when it did eventually come out. Some praising it as a well-made and ballsy horror movie that was trying something different, and others who simply found the whole thing a bit boring. On top of that, you have a title that sounds very reminiscent of recent horror movie flops like The Bye-Bye Man or Slender Man. The lead actor, James Badge Dale, though he is a very good actor and works brilliantly in the film, isn't exactly a household name. The opening prologue of the movie lasts for about 25 whole minutes before we're even introduced to the main character and plot, and as mentioned before, the movie goes out of its way to make rather strange choices and leaves a lot of stuff unexplained that could either alienate or put off people that watch the movie. So, when you put all of these factors into perspective, it's easy to see why this film has ended up in the position it has. The film took quite a while to come to streaming sites, and even then, the film still doesn't have a Blu-ray or DVD release. Though it is nice and refreshing to see a first-time director be given so much creative freedom with such a substantial budget, you then start to think to yourself, was it even worth it when you realise how the studio treated it? Personally, I would put The Empty Man in the same category as films like Stay and A Cure for Wellness. Movies that tried something different, something risky, and something weird that didn't get the recognition or love they deserved when they were first released. And if those movies are anything to go by, then The Empty Man is definitely going to become a cult classic years down the line. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also comment below with any movies you'd like to see addressed in this series. Thank you for watching the third episode of Under the Radar, and I will see you all in the next one.